All right, so this project is called the Incentive Zoning Update, and what it is looking at what we call the public benefit point system. That is a policy in the county, and we are looking at this 14-year-old policy and seeing ways to modernize it and make it better. So today we will share an overview of the project with you all, explain how the current policy works. We've done a lot of analysis of how the policy has performed over the years, so we'll share that with you. And then we have come up with some ideas and recommendations to update this policy, and we will share those with you as well. We have a total of about 90 minutes on this call. We hope to get done with all the presentation within the first 60 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We highly encourage everybody to ask their questions, any type of question that you have, but also at the same time, we ask that you be respectful of others asking questions. So if somebody's asking a question and you want to get next in line, you can raise your hand or wait till they're done to voice your sort of point as well. So this is a pretty technical policy, but we've still tried to do a good amount of outreach for this project. As with all our projects, we really try to get the word out in the community about these. In addition to that, we have an internal working group of our planning staff members who use this policy on a daily basis. We also had a technical working group that included everybody from land use attorneys and developers to engineers, members of the different county agencies like the Permitting Services, Department of Transportation, Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and also members from council staff as well as County Executive's Office. In addition to that, we went far and wide and talked to a lot of different small groups that may be interested or impacted by this policy. So that included a lot of minority business representatives, directors of regional services, advocacy groups, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we want to bring the public into the discussion, and that's why we are hosting this open house today. We have another one next week, same time on the 15th. So if you know someone that wanted to attend but was not able to attend, we recommend that they check that out on our website and sign up for it. And we have a very good website. The link is up here, and we'll put the link in the chat as well for this meeting. And that project website has a lot of useful information about the basics of how the current point system works, and also some of the data that we've collected about what type of public benefits we've received over the past 14 years. And on the right is a list of some of the small group conversations we had earlier on in the process. Where we are within the planning process for this effort, we have created these draft recommendations, and we are essentially taking those recommendations out to the stakeholders and the public. We shared them with our technical working group about a week and a half ago. We are sharing them in this virtual open house setting today and on May 15th again. And then we will go to our planning board, and the planning board will host working sessions where testimony will be allowed in the months of June and July. And once the planning board feels comfortable with the recommendations that we put forth and edits them in a manner that they see fit, we will then take the same recommendations to County Council for their review in the fall. And once the County Council staff and County Council review the recommendations we are putting forward to amend this policy, then we will create the legal documents that will update our county code and make this version of the policy become implementable. And then slowly over time, we will start to implement this policy in the various parts of the county where it applies. So we do want to sort of set a common table here, so to speak, so we can provide everybody a short overview of how the current policy works. The current policy is called the Public Benefit Point System. But before we get there, we wanted to make sure we also explained a few technical terms that you might hear repeated through the presentation. So I'm going to turn to Grace to walk us through some of these technical terms.
Good evening, everybody. I hope to not complicate this too much for those of you that are not familiar with these technical terms, but we're going to start off with floor area ratio. This is commonly referred to as FAR, and we'll be using that term a lot this evening in our draft recommendations. And so what this means essentially is the square footage of the proposed development on a given site divided by that site's area in terms of square footage. And what this computes to is a whole number and change, and that's considered your FAR. We also use FAR to set zoning maximums on our site. So you'll commonly hear about us talking about a property zoning in terms of FAR maximums. FAR can be delivered in a variety of ways and intensities. And so the image on the left side of your screen shows one FAR being shown 3 different ways on a property. So the image on your left shows one FAR in terms of square footage being delivered with 100% of the lot being covered. And it looks like a 1-story building. With 50% of the lot covered, it turns into a 2-story building. And then with a quarter of the lot coverage, it turns into a 4-story building. And the image on the right side shows how with a 50% lot coverage maximum, FAR can increase in size from your lower story buildings to mid-rise to high-rise buildings. Next slide. So as Atul said, there is 2 types of development within the 4 zones that are covered under this incentive density policy. The standard method of development essentially has a lower threshold of FAR allowed on that particular site. It's usually 0.5 or 1 FAR. And if a property were to develop up to that lower threshold, it's considered standard method, and it could move through our planning process with a site plan that would need to meet certain code requisites, which we will get into this evening. Above standard method or above that threshold of 0.5 or 1 FAR, if an applicant chooses to develop the property at a higher FAR, that becomes an optional method type of development. And that's when we look at this incentive density policy and looking for that project to deliver public benefits. And so how does this actually work with the property and the zoning and everything I just sort of stated? So an example is on the screen on your left where you can see in the colorful numbers and letters this wonky thing, and this is considered just an example of a property zone. So I'm going to read it to you. CRT2, C1, R1.5, H60. Breaking this down, CRT2 means commercial residential town. That's one of the incentive policy zones. 2 is considered the maximum FAR allowed on the property. C stands for commercial, so commercial is allowed 1 FAR. R's allowed 1.5, that's residential, and H stands for maximum building height. So it has a maximum building height on the site of 60 feet. So if a property were to develop on this site with the standard method, like I said, that's 1 FAR, that they can move forward meeting our certain code requisites with site plan review and move on to building permit. However, if an applicant would like to achieve that fully mapped CRT of 2.0, that means that an optional method of development would need to be pursued. And that's when we're looking at our CR guidelines, commercial residential guidelines. And there's an equation within that to determine how many public benefit points would be delivered with that particular project.
So as Grace mentioned, this policy applies to 4 zones: the CR zone, the commercial residential zone, the commercial residential town zone. The CR zone is shown in yellow color on this map here. The CRT zone is shown on the salmon color. The EOF is employment office zone, that's shown in blue here. And the LSC zone is the purple zone, that is the life sciences zone that's shown in purple here. And so together, these zones comprise less than 4% of the total county's area. However, they are our highest density zones, and in the past 14 years, we have seen almost 14 million square feet of development approved in various projects in these 4 zones. So they are very high density. And the purpose of these zones is to encourage a mix of uses near transit and high density development near transit, so we can preserve some of the more environmentally sensitive areas of the county, like in the ag reserve. And when we enable applicants to build to a higher density development, we expect them to provide public benefits in return that would benefit not only the occupants of their project, but also the surrounding neighborhoods. So that's the basic mechanism of exchange, that applicants get to build to higher levels of density, and we as a public receive public benefits that are useful to the communities where these projects are located. The point system itself is essentially a way to evaluate the public benefits and make sure that projects are providing public benefits in line with the amount of development that they are proposing, and also in line with the recommendations that the local sector plan or master plan has identified as the greatest needs for those communities. We have this as a menu-based approach, and one of the reasons it's a menu is because we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of transparency about what was being asked as a public benefit, and also that the same menu could be used repeatedly to streamline the review of development applications. This policy was originally created in 2010 just for one part of the county, and then expanded to these 4 zones. And it has incrementally evolved. However, in the past 14 years, the world has kind of changed a couple of times over, as we all know. We have had, the COVID pandemic in 2020, which really upended a lot of real estate sort of best practices and assumptions around what was a desirable type of development. We see all the headlines around office vacancy. There's also a growing need for housing across the country at all price points. So that has come to the fore. And then as a county, we've passed several landmark legislations. In 2019, we passed the Racial Equity and Social Justice Act. In 2021, we passed the Climate Action Plan, which aims to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. And in 2022, we updated the general plan for the county, Thrive Montgomery 2050, which really sets the vision for continuing to double down on transit-oriented development and really preserving the more ecologically sensitive areas of the county. So we are trying to update this public benefit point system in a manner that would ensure that there's a balance between the public benefits that are required against the cost of doing those developments, and also in a way that is aligned with the county goals. And we've done that by reviewing the policy and its performance over the past 14 years. And we are hoping to modernize it to bring it up to speed and make sure that all the visions that the Climate Action Plan and Thrive Montgomery 2050 have put forward, that development, when it comes through this method of development and provides public benefits, is really aligned with those policy goals, and it moves the needle towards implementing those ideas. We did a lot of analysis over the past year. We looked at every aspect of this policy. And I must say, this was a nationally recognized policy when it was created in 2010. Not many jurisdictions asks for or get public benefits from development. So it was really good timing and a good policy to start with. We evaluated every aspect of this policy. We talked to the people who wrote the policy. We looked at its theoretical underpinnings, but also the financial assumptions that went into the implementation process. We took a range of analysis. We looked at other jurisdictions and tried to compare us to those to see how they were doing things and if there were some lessons to be learned. And then we synthesized all that into some key takeaways. And here is a list of all the types of analysis that we did over the past 4 or 5 months. But it's important to sort of mention these key takeaways because they're really helping us sort of come up with the recommendations that you'll hear about today. First of all, there's been very uneven level of development across the 4 zones. So most of the development has been concentrated in just 2 zones, and we'll show you some data around that. Number 2, our public benefit point system is a huge menu, and it is bigger than all the other jurisdictions that we compared this to, and we'll show you what those jurisdictions were. However, even with the large menu, we tend to get the same type of public benefits over and over again in development projects that are doing optional method. Also, when the original menu was created, cost and feasibility of projects was considered, but it did not become a sort of defining feature of the current system. This is very different from places that have a different type of a state rule, like in Virginia, where everything is based on a proffer system, and you really have to sort of base public benefits on dollars and cents versus policy goals. And the point system itself, we are very unique as a county where we are using a system of points to approve incentive density in terms of FAR. Most other jurisdictions we analyzed and looked at use a much more direct system where they are evaluating public benefits in terms of how much FAR they are worth and then approving that FAR for development projects. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot of updates to county policy in the past 5 years, and this menu that exists today doesn't really align with those in a direct way, and we think there's a great opportunity to find that alignment. I'm going to turn to Lu-Wei to unpack some of the points about how development has occurred in the 4 zones over the past decade.
Thanks, Artur. So let's look at the project data first. So between 2010 and 2022, the planning board approved 65 sketch plans associated with 67 approved set plans. And what are those projects in terms of their zoning categories? So you can definitely see the pie chart to your right. So of all these 67 projects, most of the development activities are covered by CR and CRT. So with 53 approvals in CR zones and 13 approvals in CRT, whereas the EOF, we definitely can say only accounts for 2%, which means there's one project has been approved and there's no project happening in LLC. So truly there is uneven development activities across the 4 incentive zones.
Yeah, so this policy is sort of intended to apply to these 4 zones, but most of the activity is happening in just 2 of them. And a majority of it is happening in just 1 of them. And as I mentioned, we looked at other jurisdictions across the country. We compared our policy to similar programs that Austin, Detroit, and Seattle have nationally. And in the region, we looked at Arlington, Fairfax, and Washington, D.C. as well. And as I mentioned, our menu is sort of the biggest by comparison to all these jurisdictions, which is not necessarily a good thing, because what we found was that because it was such a big menu, many things on the menu were actually never delivered because people just never chose those things from the menu because they had so many other options. And in fact, what we found was that places that were really successful in using these type of incentives to achieve policy goals had a pretty limited menu, and that menu aligned directly with these policy goals. On the right, here's an example from Austin's downtown density bonus program, where you can get bonus density, but half of that bonus density has to be earned by providing affordable housing. So the city of Austin has sort of highlighted affordable housing as one of the key public benefits they want, and they're really sort of promoting its use to development. And so when you look at our menu, here are the 36 public benefits that we have today. And because it's such a large menu, there's a lot of overlap between certain public benefits. There's also some conflicting public benefits, like we incentivize minimum parking, but we also incentivize the provision of additional public parking. And then there's some public benefits that just compete. Like, for example, you can have a roof of a project that can have a cool roof for energy efficiency, or it can have a vegetated roof, which serves a slightly different purpose for stormwater management or native habitats. However, there's only one roof on a building, so sometimes these public benefits are competing for that same sort of portion of a project, and that's something we realized doing this sort of deep dive analysis. Grace, do you want to talk about the regional review that we did?
Yes, so we looked around at our friends in the region to see what they were doing as well. And so we looked at Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Arlington County, Fairfax County, as well as Washington, D.C. And what we have found in the review of these programs is that we're really unique in the way that we apply our zoning, whereas we give a property a mapped FAR, and then the incentive density sort of rewards or justifies that zoning as it moves through the regulatory process. Whereas in Northern Virginia, particularly with the proffer-based system, when they are reviewing a project and negotiating the FAR at the same time, it becomes more stronger. And when anything really in many of the jurisdictions that we've reviewed is based on FAR, it's a stronger term and return with public benefits. And so one of the key takeaways for us is that a stronger alignment with updated county goals is required. The chart on the screen is really telling. And so the red bars that you see are, so we've got the whole list of public benefits at the bottom of your screen. So we've got 36 of them. Again, that's a lot. But each of the red bars above those public benefits are showing how often these public benefits have been delivered with optional method projects. So the bigger the bar, the more often that they've been delivered. The blue bars are showing public benefits that are prioritized by a certain sector plan. So say when Silver Spring sector plan was adopted, it put emphasis on neighborhood services, public benefits, or open space as a public benefit. However, what we're seeing when we compare the blue to the red is that even though those public benefits are prioritized, doesn't necessarily mean they're actually being delivered with our development process. The second thing that this chart shows is that there's certain public benefits that are just being used over and over and over again, and then there's other public benefit points that have never really been used in projects. So when we took all of this analysis to the planning board in December, we had a few words of advice to staff when we moved forward into the recommendations. And that is, number one, simplify the system. You know, we've said over and over again, it's complicated. There's a lot going on here in comparison to other jurisdictions, and so simplify. The second thing that we learned is that our categories really need to be aligned with county goals. So in particular, housing for all and environmental resilience. We also wanted to give master planners and regulatory reviewers more flexibility when we're trying to implement the policy through development review. And then lastly, over the 4 zones, streamline the process and make development as close to by right where it makes sense and where it's appropriate in that zone.
Thank you, Grace. So that was a pretty high-level overview of how the current policy works and what our analysis kind of showed us in terms of insights. We'll now sort of switch gears and share the recommendations that we are putting forth to the board to update the policy. So at a very high level, we are trying to achieve 2 things. One is to modernize the policy and bring it up to speed to catch up with all the changes that have happened in the construction and industry, in the energy codes and the building codes, and also in terms of real estate development as to what type of buildings we are seeing being built within the marketplace. But also looking forward, we want to really make sure that the very ambitious sort of picture that Thrive Montgomery 2050 has painted, or the Climate Action Plan, the ambitious climate goals that we've set forth, that this policy is aligned with those bigger umbrella documents, and that these public benefits are such that when they're provided through development review and development projects, they achieve the vision of these foundational documents. I do want to share some key points before we get into the actual ideas that we are putting forth. One, that all these recommendations are based on project data, our jurisdiction research of how others are doing things, and financial feasibility of providing public benefits. We've done a lot of interagency coordination. We've met with our colleagues in the Department of Permitting Services, Department of Transportation, Department of Housing and Community Affairs, the Arts and Humanities Council, and the Office of Agriculture. So we're really trying to make sure that we bring our partner agencies along as we propose these updates. And those conversations are ongoing, and we are continuing to get feedback on all these public benefits from those agencies. So what you see today here might look a little bit different, like, next week, but we are generally sort of maintaining the spirit of of these ideas. We have a menu-based approach today, and we are continuing to maintain a menu-based approach. We think this is a good, flexible way to get public benefits, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. However, we are making the menu a lot more focused, and you'll see that. And we are recommending that the policy be applied differently to each of the 4 zones. And we want to make sure that we continue to recognize that transit-oriented development and walkable communities are a desired outcome, but we also want to make sure that projects that develop in those communities are providing meaningful public benefits. And last but not the least, we want to really focus more on the types of public benefits that are needed in a community. And even if they are required by another law or regulation, we think it's okay to incentivize them through this policy because some of those things are really needed and some of those things are really expensive to provide. So we want to make sure that the focus is more on not whether it's a legal requirement or not, but more on what is missing from a community, what are the type of public benefits that are really needed here so we can really focus on what we want. So overall, we are trying to simplify the system. So we are proposing a much slimmer menu, but we are trying to maintain a sense of proportionality in that smaller projects might provide fewer public benefits and larger projects provide greater public benefits. So we are recommending that we move away from this points-based system and really evaluate public benefits in terms of FAR that Grace had explained earlier. We are trying to very clearly state what the code requirements are and also eliminate a lot of the complicated formulas and compliance procedures that the current policy has within itself today. And last but not the least, we're really trying to enhance flexibility within the system. And we think master plans and sector plans should have a greater role in defining the public benefits that are needed within a community. So some of the things that will stay the same is that there will still be those 2 methods of development available to these 4 zones, the standard method and the optional method of development. If you're doing the standard method of development, you would still have to meet all those code requisites, and we'll show you what those are. But if you go beyond that standard method FAR to build up to your mapped FAR, you would have to provide public benefits. And in the case of Bethesda, for example, there's density that can be purchased even beyond the mapped FAR. And that type of density, what we are calling as Excel to build density, would also be required to provide public benefits. In fact, as you get higher up, the more public benefits become significant and costly because we think that this should scale up with the amount of FAR that a project is trying to achieve. Grace, do you want to talk about the prerequisites?
Sure. So when we refer to code requisites for site plans, in Chapter 59, there is a significant amount of technical review that's required by staff to recommend a project for approval to the planning board. And so with that, we've sort of listed all of these on your screen. For those of you that are familiar with the development process, this is very familiar to you. But for those of you that aren't, I'm just going to briefly go through them. So forest conservation is actually forest conservation law. This is a county code chapter 22A that projects must comply with when we recommend planning board approval. We also review the project with our growth and infrastructure policy. So when we are recommending approval of a project, we need to make sure that adequate public facilities exist to facilitate that additional development. We need to find master plan conformance or sector plan conformance. So in a given area, there's typically streetscape standards or open space recommendations or other environmental recommendations within that plan that the site plan must adhere to. And we're also looking at historic preservation as appropriate. If a project is involving residential development, we need to review it based on Chapter 25A, the MPDU law, which is enforced by DHCA, Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And we also need to review, or the project is also reviewed by our county agencies, including DPS, DOT, for those other county requirements. And so this list is extensive in of its own right, just for standard method, and it has grown over time. And code requirements have grown and be intensified over time. So we fully acknowledge that doing development in Montgomery County sets a high bar. So just doing standard method represents these things. And then when we consider optional method, it includes this and then any other incentive density policy that we are discussing today.
And we are not making any recommendations to adjust any of the code requisites, but there might be areas where we are identifying specific public benefits which might be needed to meet code requisites, but could be incentivized, and we'll share a few examples of that. Let's go to the next slide here. So here is kind of the overall framework that we are proposing. We currently have these 7 different public benefit categories, and we are proposing that those be realigned into 4 categories that are directly in sync with our highest county priorities. The first category is housing for all. It talks about providing market rate, affordable and attainable housing to people of all income levels. The environmental resilience category really incentivizes the provision of sustainable buildings and green features on sites. Infrastructure for compact growth incentivizes the provision of improvements to pedestrian, cycling, and transit access infrastructure. And complete communities provides incentives for including things like retail, community gathering spaces, great parks, and well-designed buildings, so that there are enough amenities within a community that people can meet a lot of their daily needs within a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute bike ride. These 4 categories are directly in sync with what the Climate Action Plan is trying to achieve, and also what Thrive Montgomery 2050 has put forth as a vision for compact growth within complete communities. And it is really important to note that we've really tried to structure the public benefits in a way that we believe will lead to equitable development outcomes. For example, providing housing within a high income area that is affordable to a greater set of people will make those amenities in those areas become within the reach of a larger swath of people. Creating environmental improvements within communities that are disenfranchised or communities of color will help improve the quality of air and water in those communities. Similarly, creating infrastructure that promotes walking and biking and use of transit will not only enable those people who don't have access to a car be able to move around, but also improve their physical health and mental well-being. And complete community amenities will really create mixed-use communities that have retail and daily amenities and neighborhood services that are available to a wider swath of people. So within those 4 categories that we just mentioned, housing for all, environmental resilience, infrastructure for compact growth, and complete community amenities, we have outlined 13 different public benefits. Currently, we have this huge menu of 36, and we are proposing it be streamlined into 13. So under housing, we have the provision of affordable housing, the provision of larger sized units within apartments, single-family homes, and townhomes, and also providing deeper levels of affordability within projects so that more people have access to those housing units as things that an applicant can do to earn the right to build up to their mapped FAR. Under environmental resilience, projects can create sustainable buildings, get LEED certification, create high energy efficient buildings, or use or produce renewable energy on site. They can also do things like pervious paving or green roofs to earn the right to build up to their mapped FAR. Under infrastructure for compact growth, projects can do offsite improvements to sidewalks, bike lanes, bus access, train access, etc., or create a dense network of streets that can create walkable environments, or build public facilities like bus stops and BRT stops, etc. And under complete communities, we've expanded the public benefit of public art to art and placemaking and enhanced the list of partners that people can work with to create art and do placemaking within the sector plans where the project is located. We've also included benefits that would incentivize the provision of affordable housing for artists or the provision of space for creating and displaying art like galleries, performance venues, etc. Under Great Public Realm, we are really incentivizing improvements to existing parks and public open spaces or the creation of new parks and public open spaces. And under Design Excellence, we've created a pretty set list of strategies that projects can utilize within the developments to make sure that the projects, the buildings and the public spaces and the streets and the streetscapes are designed to a high level. Now, looking at this list, one might ask that, is this reducing choice for people to provide public benefits? And we've thought a lot about that. And, we're going from 36 to 13 public benefits, but in essence, we've created 4 tiers of participation for each of these public benefits. And we'll show you an example of that. So instead of just having 13 ways to participate in the public benefits and provide public benefits, an applicant would have really 52 ways to do that within these 13 public benefits, because each of these has 4 different levels of participation. So what does that look like? This is an example on your screen showing what the renewable energy public benefit would look like with participation options at 4 different tiers. In general, when we go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 to tier 4, it becomes more and more intensive to meet the requirements of the public benefit. In return, an applicant or a developer would earn a higher level of FAR and earn a higher level, the right to build to a higher level of FAR up to their mapped FAR. So in this example, if a project utilizes or generates a third of renewable energy on site, they would earn the right to build up to 0.25 of their mapped FAR. If they increase that commitment to 2/3, they could earn the right to build up to 1 FAR. And if they go further to 3/4, they could do 1.5 FAR. In every public benefit, there is a tier 4 public benefit option, which is a very aspirational and high quality public benefit that we've identified. If a project provides a tier 4 level public benefit, they would not be expected to provide other public benefits because these public benefits in themselves are so significant. So in this case, if a project is able to generate 100% of its renewable energy on site, which is really, really difficult and expensive to do, we think that they can be exempt from providing other public benefits. This is not that different from how we approach affordable housing today, where if you provide 20% affordable housing units, you don't have to provide other public benefits. So we think that even though we have a shorter menu, by having these tiers of public benefits, we'll be able to maintain a lot of flexibility in how these public benefits are included within projects. So for each project that follows the optional method of development, we would be asking that they provide at least one benefit from housing or environmental resilience, and at least one public benefit from infrastructure for compact growth and complete community amenities. And this is important because housing and environment really represent our county-wide priorities, but a lot of the local needs that are identified as public needs during the master planning process are listed within infrastructure for compact growth and complete community amenities. And we think that the projects that come through the optional method of development should really be thinking about both those areas, county-wide priorities and local needs. Because as you saw previously, master plans have had very mixed results in making sure that the public benefits that are identified during master plans are actually delivered through development review. So a project would be expected to provide at least one from the top 2 and one from the bottom 2, unless, of course, it provides that tier 4 public benefit, which is such a large commitment that they would be exempt from providing other public benefits. And in this way, we think that a project would have a lot of options. So on the left here, you see a diagram of a building that shows how it is divided into kind of the standard method FAR, which is just maybe 2 of these floors. Then it might have a lot of mapped FAR, which is another 8 of these floors. And then if you are in a place like Bethesda, you might have even more density to buy that you can buy, which we are calling Excel to build density. So a project would have to provide public benefits in most cases to earn the right to build, for example, these 8 floors of this building. And they could do it in a number of ways. They could take an approach where they do the lower level tier benefits from all the 4 categories that we shared, or they might feel more comfortable doing slightly larger commitments of public benefits from just 2 categories, or alternatively, they could do a tier 4 public benefit from just 1 category, and that would be the totality of the commitment to deliver public benefits. So we think this switching to this FAR-based system to evaluate public benefits, having a streamlined menu, but then having these options of doing different tiers of public benefits will really create a win-win situation where we do start to get the meaningful public benefits that are identified during master planning, but at the same time, applicants have a lot of flexibility on how to deliver those public benefits. We did do a lot of financial analysis. Dawn from Hyatt Brown, who's on this call, helped us with that. We costed what the existing public benefits cost to deliver. We compared that cost to these new lists that we've created. We created development prototypes across the county in different project types. And then we loaded in the existing menu of public benefits on these projects. And then we loaded in the new menu of public benefits onto the same projects and compared the costs of doing those. And we feel pretty confident that these public benefits that we are proposing can be delivered by while maintaining financial feasibility. To provide some added flexibility, both for the community and also for the applicants, we are enabling payment in lieu options in specific areas. However, it is our preference that public benefits are actually constructed by the developers who are building these projects. But there might be a case where there is a really large scale public benefit that was identified during the sector plan that no one property is going to be able to finance and deliver, in which case a payment in lieu might be really useful to make sure that these payments can be lumped together and hopefully complemented with some CIP funding to build a larger facility. The rates for these will be based on a per square foot basis, so they would maintain that sense of proportionality and scale with the intensity of the project. And we would update these rates on an annual basis to keep up with inflation. And last but not the least, this idea that there might be additional density that can be sort of purchased or paid for by providing additional public benefits, this concept of Excel to build density, we think it's a positive thing if used responsibly. So what we are proposing is that sector plans through the master planning process should really take this into consideration. And if a sector plan does create a density bank of Excel to build density, that those requests to tap into that additional density beyond the mapped FAR should be really sort of considered on a case-by-case basis. So we would be expecting the developer who's interested in doing that to submit a formal request with their development application. They would have to clearly articulate what the proposed public benefit would be, and it would have to be something that's not already on the menu. And they would have to provide us with some information about what the costs of providing this additional public benefit would be. And then we, as a planning staff, through our development review process, would have to evaluate whether this is needed and worth giving the additional density for. And we would have to take that recommendation to the board, who would then finally approve or deny that request. So we've shared a lot of different things with you. I think it might be helpful to recap how the existing system would stack up against these proposed changes. So I'm going to turn to Grace to do that.
All right, so these next couple of slides are going to do a side-by-side comparison, especially for those that are familiar with our system, to sort of get your bearings of everything we just explained. So on the left side, our existing public benefits are 36 or plenty. On the right side, we are proposing to reduce the public benefit categories to 4, with 13 public benefits within those categories. The existing system is based on a point calculation, and this calculation is based on the amount of density or FAR proposed, as well as your tract size. And this threshold is very low, so more often than not, projects end up having to provide 100 public benefit points, which is the maximum amount of public benefit points possible. What this means in hindsight is that projects of a lower scale FAR or a 2 FAR are probably being asked to provide more public benefit points than it deserves for the project, and projects with a higher FAR, like a 6 FAR, probably aren't delivering enough public benefit points with that density. So again, what we've heard from our surrounding jurisdictions is that the FAR-based evaluation system is more on point with having the public benefit scale with the density proposed in the project. And so that's what we are proposing to evaluate this new system based on. So more public benefit, more FAR proposed, more public benefits, or the intensity of the public benefit gets delivered. Next slide.
Yep.
Oh, and so also within this project, we are tackling BLTs and TDRs. And so those of you that aren't familiar with these terms, BLTs are building lot terminations and TDRs are transfer of development rights. Both of these are intended to essentially save or preserve land in the agriculture areas of the county in perpetuity. The way of doing that is a little different in terms of purchasing BLTs or purchasing TDRs. In the existing system, both of these are recognized as public benefits and can receive points based on that. However, BLTs are actually a requirement for optional method in CR and LSC zones. So these are sort of competing with each other. We've received BLTs in every optional method that's moved forward. However, we haven't received many or any TDRs. In the current system, BLT payments can be made directly to the Agricultural Land Preservation Fund that can use that money to purchase farmland. However, the purchase of TDRs in its current state is negotiated between the developer and farmland owners without any other intermediary. So in the new system, what we are proposing is to remove BLTs and TDRs from the public benefit menu and requiring this just as a code requisite for optional method projects within the CR and the LSC overlay zone. We would like to expand the requirement from just the purchase of BLTs to either require the purchase of BLTs or TDRs, and the applicant can determine which is best based on their project. The Ag Land Preservation Fund can maintain receiving BLT payments. However, we would like to expand their ability to also accept payments for TDRs. And in doing all of these things, it actually allows CR and LSC zones to become receiving areas for TDRs where it currently does not. And this also will maintain the density bonus that comes with the purchase of a TDR. Next slide.
Thank you, Grace. So we're going to now, I think, quickly sort of go through how we are recommending that this public benefit point system be applied to each of the 4 zones. And we are recommending that it be applied differently because of the very different amount of development activity that's actually going on and has occurred in the 4 zones. So I'm going to turn to Grace to walk us through EOF, and we'll try to do this quickly so we have time at the end for your questions.
Sure. So EOF stands for the Employment Office Zone. These properties are typically located along our growth corridors. They're typically larger size properties, and the type of development that you see on here are older style, light industrial or Class BC office buildings. These types of assets have really struggled in the recent market conditions, and really we don't see much recent investment in these properties. Right?
Okay, so basically what we did is we built up the zoning profiles for each zone. So we use the GIS approach to screen the rationale and support the decision-making process. So I want to highlight this. It is important to emphasize this involves a geospatial analysis focused on the parcel level, which help us to understand how each zoning categories operates in terms of their FAR ranges, optional thresholds, frequency of FAR categories. So this is the EOF zoning profiles. Definitely can see the typical parcel size is 1 acre, the FAR threshold ranging from 0.25 to 3, and the option method threshold is 1 FAR. So, but on the chart below, definitely can see, the 0.75 FAR encompasses the largest number of EOF parcels, and this falls below our option method 1 FAR. So it's telling us majority of EOF parcels, their development potentials that has limited to the standard method, and plus only one project has utilized this option method to gain bonus density since 2010. So I'm moving to Grace to detail talk about the recommendations for EOF zone.
Okay, so the general takeaways from all those data is that most EOF properties aren't even zoned a specific FAR that would allow optional method. We've only seen one optional method project in the EOF zone, and that property has actually since been rezoned to CR. In speaking with master planners, we haven't really used the EOF zone and do not really plan on utilizing this zone in new mapping opportunities in our sector plans. And so the recommendations listed on your screen, we're recommending that the EOF be removed from the optional method of development type, which would thereby just allow the properties to develop up to their full mapped FAR through standard method. And then we would like to require a site plan above 0 FAR, just so we can ensure that those code requisites that we previously talked about are still being met.
Thank you, Grace. We'll now kind of turn our attention to the life sciences zone, the LSC. And as the name suggests, it primarily has hospitals, medical offices, biohealth uses, as well as some universities and academic uses. So Louis is going to give you a sense of sort of the density and the zoning that exists in this zone today.
Okay, let's check out the LSC zoning profile. So the LSC FAR values are ranging between 0.5 and 2. So parcels within this zone are typically larger, ranging from 3 to 4 acres in size. So only one single parcel has an FAR forced at the lower boundary of optional threshold 0.5 FAR. All the other parcels exceed this figure are considered for development under the optional method. However, we haven't received any approved project since 2010. So that therefore we delve into the realistic conditions in this zone and discovered that parcels eligible for development under the optional method are already fully constructed. As you can see the map showing Montgomery College and Adventist hospitals. So what are the remaining parcels? They are all covered by the Grace Seneca Master Plan Overlay Zone. So we believe there is an option, and what highly think is the public benefit could be regulated effectively with this overlay zone. So I'm moving to a tour detail talk about the recommendations for LLC.
Sure. So just to sort of point your attention on this, everything that is within the circle here, which comprises all but 3 properties in the LSC zone, is covered by the Great Seneca Overlay Zone. This is a zone that the Great Seneca Master Plan team has proposed to attract and retain life science development within this area, adjacent to the city of Gaithersburg and Rockville, and also incentivize the production of housing and mixed use. We've worked hand in hand with that team. They've come up with a list of public benefits that they will attach to the overlay zone, which are in great alignment with the 4 categories that we are proposing. So because of all those reasons, we think that it makes sense to regulate public benefits in the LSC zoned properties through the Great Seneca Overlay Zone itself. And those 3 other properties that are not within the overlay zone and that do not have development potential to do optional method, those properties should be exempt from providing public benefits because they'll actually never develop more than they already have for a variety of reasons, whether it's the zoning potential or existing buildings on site or binding elements that prevent you to build above a certain amount of FAR. However, for those 3 properties, we do continue to recommend that if a site plan comes in above 0.5 FAR, they should have to go through the site plan application so that the code requisites are met. And now we're going to sort of take a little bit of time to talk about the CR and CRT zones together, because our recommendations for those are kind of bundled.
Okay, so the CR zone, that stands for commercial residential zone. These zones are typically located within central business districts or along major red line metro stations throughout the county. So in Down County or in Bethesda and Silver Spring, what we see in CR projects typically get delivered as commercial office building high rises, or we see mixed use residential buildings with ground floor retail. But CR optional method, when it's delivered in Up County or in the upper areas of our county, looks a little different. We typically see a townhouse style development with retail centers.
So let's check out the CR zoning profile. So their FAR values are wider than those in UF and LIC, ranging from 0.5 to 8, but the parcels are commonly less than 1 acre in size. So the bar charts below illustrate that aside from 0.5 FAR threshold, majority of CR parcels, around 98%, qualify for the optional method under our incentive policy. The CR zone also is a listed zone where we have received the most approvals, with 53 projects approved under the optional method development. So I'm passing to Grace and keep introducing the CRT.
So CRT stands for Commercial Residential Town. These properties, or this zone, is typically found on the edge of central business districts or along our growth corridors, particularly where there's other perhaps like BRT stops or other bus stop locations. And what we found actually is that the CRT zone has been applied in many areas of the county where there's probably larger size properties and larger FAR than it was originally intended for. But some images of CRT development is shown on your screen. So we typically receive low to mid-story buildings, which are multifamily. It could also be townhouse with ground floor retail.
So in CRT zone, once again, it features a FAR range of 0.25 to 4.75. The typical parcel size is less than 1 acre. The optional method threshold for CRT is 1 FAR. The bar chart tells us that the predominant number of CRT parcels adhere to the standard method. So since 2010, we have approved a total of 13 projects that employ the optional method development in the CRT zone. So such combined conditions offer a valuable insight, suggesting that lower the optional method threshold to 0.5 FAR will provide more tailored recommendations for both CR and CRT zone collectively. So I'm passing to Grace again.
So the recommendations for both the CR and the CRT zone, the first recommendation listed on your screen really is the major takeaway that we saw from the data, like Louay just said. Most of the CRT zone properties, FAR, those properties are predominantly zone 0.5 to 1 FAR. So with the threshold of standard method currently being 1 FAR, we're really not getting a predominant bulk of the CRT properties through optional method. And so we are recommending that we lower that threshold for optional method for the CRT zone to 0. or greater than 0.5, so that aligns with the CR threshold. And then we are continuing to recommend this tiered density framework that Atul has been describing throughout this night, and requiring the incentive density public benefits be delivered with the optional method process, and allowing master plans the flexibility to modify this menu through their review process.
Thank you, Grace. So now we are almost to the end here. We have about 5 or 6 more slides. We are going to sort of just give you an overview of what the public benefits under each of these 4 categories will look like. So we'll start with Housing for All. Under Housing for All, there are 3 ways to provide public benefits at those different tiers of participation. Number 1 is you provide greater percentages of affordable units than is required by the code or the sector plan that the property is located within. Number two is providing larger family-sized units in apartments, single-family homes, townhouses, and 2/2s, both for rent and for sale. And number three is providing deeper levels of affordability than the base 70% AMI that the typical MPDUs require.
So in the environmental resilience category, we're looking at public benefits, including energy, green building, and sustainable sites. In the energy category, we're looking for buildings that exceed the energy efficiency standards. May sound familiar to those of you familiar with our process because it is very similar to what currently exists in the code. We see that there's a good benefit in keeping this. And we're also looking for projects that would use or generate on-site energy with the goal towards net zero energy. In the green building section, the green building code, really, we're looking at buildings that would meet or exceed alternative compliance through LEED certification. And so this would range from LEED Silver up to LEED Platinum. And then in the sustainable sites category, we're looking at projects that would incorporate sustainable elements, including biophilic design, enhanced green roof, bird-friendly design, pervious pavement, and adaptively reusing buildings where it's appropriate in the site. And one thing I should mention here is these recommendations have been made in cooperation or in coordination with our friends at Department of Permitting Services Sustainability section.
Thank you, Grace. And likewise, I forgot to mention that the housing recommendations have been coordinated with our Department of Housing and Community Affairs as well, because we think it's important that those implementation bodies are part of the ideation for these public benefits.
So on to the infrastructure for compact growth section. The public benefit categories here include offsite improvements, public facilities, and grid and trail extensions. For offsite improvements, we're looking for streetscape improvements along a public street or offsite bicycle improvements, offsite stormwater facilities, or even a daylighting a pipe stream if it's recommended in the sector plan. In the public facilities section, we're looking for major public facilities that are transit oriented. So we're looking at BRT stations or improvements to those bike stations. And then it scales up as the tiers go up to potentially a police station or a larger metro station. And we're also looking in this category, incentivizing undergrounding utilities along the site. In the grid and trail extensions section, we're looking at improving overall connectivity. And so this could look like private or public pedestrian trail extensions. This could also look like improving the grid of streets that are being delivered in our subdivisions, or if it's just one new public street that's going to connect and really contribute to the larger network, we're looking at incentivizing that, even if it's something that's already recommended in the sector plans. And then we're also looking at a major connection. This would be the tier 4 in this category. A major connection in an area where there's environmentally sensitive issues that would really contribute to the overall network.
Great. And last but not the least, we have under amenities for complete communities 4 different public benefits. We've expanded the public art benefit to include art and placemaking. And we've also expanded the partners that developers and applicants can work with to install art and do programming. So this would include the Public Art Trust Steering Committee, but also arts and entertainment districts, urban partnerships, and even local nonprofits that are arts-based within the sector plan area. And then we are looking beyond that. We are trying to look at the whole ecosystem that arts need to thrive within a community. So a public benefit included here is providing affordable housing for artists, but also providing arts and cultural public facilities like theaters, art galleries, performance venues. These would be in that tier 4 public benefit category. So if somebody provided a major art venue, they would be exempt from providing other public benefits. In the neighborhood services and mixed use, this is sort of just carrying forward what we already have on the menu and incentivizing the provision of neighborhood serving uses, retail, etc., scaling up to the highest level to be a major public facility like a library or a recreation center. Under Great Public Realm, we are incentivizing, again, high quality parks and public open spaces, and improvements to existing parks and public spaces that might be near the property. And then for design excellence, we are really, we've created a list of strategies that applicants can use to make sure that their building footprint, massing, architecture, parking strategy, and the overall wellness index of their building is to a very high degree. So that in essence kind of summarizes all the 13 public benefits that we have identified in the 4 categories. And then in terms of applying this to the new system, like I mentioned, we did a lot of financial feasibility analysis alongside our consultant, and we compared sort of the cost of providing these public benefits in different types of developments in different parts of the county, from a high-rise in Bethesda to a townhouse or a 2-over-2 development in Gaithersburg, and everything in between, to really understand what the cost of including these public benefits would be within these projects. And we adjusted the amounts and the rates to make sure that these projects were remaining financially feasible as we adjusted the menu. And so, you know, in the end, we think this creates a really well-aligned menu. It will get us the things we want, but it will also provide a lot of flexibility for applicants to provide those things by having different levels of participation. And we are really excited about this. And I think this kind of summarizes our presentation. In terms of sort of upcoming things, we have another of these open houses on May 15th. Then we'll go to the planning board in June and July, and hopefully we'll get to the county council for their review in the fall. And then in the winter, we can have this approved and take the necessary legislative steps to make changes to the county code to implement this version of the policy. We do have a really great website that all this information will also be available on, and we'll put that in the chat. But I wanted to pause here and answer any questions that people might have, because I know this was a lot of information.
Atul, we do receive questions in our chat box.
Yeah, we can certainly address those. I want to see if any people want to speak up before we get to the questions in the chat. Nancy, you have your hand up. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to get my mic off. At the very beginning of this, there was an example which seemed to indicate that there was a very formulaic number. So certain public benefits would get 0.2 0.25 FAR, and if you did this, it would be 0.1 FAR, and then the last one was to the mapped FAR, et cetera. So I'm trying to figure out, is this formulaic, or is there still negotiations like there is under the current system, where there's a range of points available for a particular public benefit and you're negotiating with staff on whether you're getting all 10 points related to a particular benefit? That's
a very astute question. So thank you for raising that. And you're absolutely right in that what we are proposing now is very formulaic. And the reason we are doing that is that we are providing 4 different levels of participation already. So by doing that, we have created that kind of range. But we want to make sure that when somebody is getting incentive density for a certain type of benefit, that they're actually meeting the standards that are expected. Oftentimes, we've had a lot of back and forth with applicants and negotiation, and a lot of these currently are quite subjective. So it is a very subjective discussion, like, is this building worth 5 design excellence points or 10 design excellence points? And, you know, one person could say 5 and another one could say 10 to the same thing. So we are trying to make this a lot more standardized and clear, so we achieve two things. One, that public benefits, when they get the right level of FAR, are delivering to a certain standard, and two, that sort of there's no haggling back and forth about the merit of providing a public benefit between staff and an applicant.
So we'll see this kind of chart for each of those 13
Yes, you
during the
will.
public comment process, so
Yeah.
that it doesn't come in at the end during adoption of some sort of guidelines that there
No,
won't be.
no,
Okay.
and actually we have all that in this presentation. I just didn't want to overload
Okay. No, that's fine.
everybody.
That's fine.
And what we can
I'm
do
sure
is
it'll come
we will post this slide deck with all those details onto our website tomorrow, so people can go there, and those who really want to, here it is. So you can see
Okay.
all the tiers for all the different benefits, and we'll put that on our website tomorrow so everybody has access to it.
Okay. No, that's great. That'll give us a chance to look at that. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? There are a few questions in the chat, so maybe I can go to those. Number one, I think there was a question, comment from Susan, so I'll read that out. Or Susan, do you want to just share your thoughts?
You would prefer it this way because I can't seem to turn on my camera. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
just
So
fine.
I was involved in this a long time ago, and I really think this is a much better system, and I'm glad that you're trying to regularize it a lot. But one of the things I was glad to see you did this feasibility analysis, but what I wasn't clear on is whether what I was seeing was the developers choosing the benefits based on the cost of the benefits rather than the need of the community. And so, you know, it might cost more to provide a park than to just do slightly better design on the facade. And so I didn't really know how, if you were comparing those kind of benefits financially, or you could require the developer to show that the finances, you know, for transparency, because I found that it just felt like they were choosing the cheap things like signage rather than the expensive and more desirable things. And
Yeah.
so I noticed in the chart you showed with the blue and red lines that parks were the things that was rarely provided, which is something I was working on before. So kind of wondering about that whole system and what will, you know, why somebody would choose to do a park now any more than they might have before, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think that's another very good observation. So there's a couple of things to add to this. First of all, we've really tried to make sure that the things that are listed under each of the public benefits at tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 are somewhat equally expensive to do. So we've tried to maintain some parity. For example, you know, in tier 1, you could do 10% more energy efficient buildings, or you could make improvements to an existing park within the neighborhood. So there is a little bit of a sort of evening out, and as the tiers get higher, things get expensive everywhere. So we've tried to maintain that through our costing analysis, and this idea of asking for financial contribution information. We talked to a lot of people in our own department. Also, we talked to a lot of jurisdictions that do this in the Dillon state rural states like Virginia, and I think that's appropriate when people are asking for that Excel to build density. But at a certain level, even we as staff don't always have the financial sort of skills and awareness to adjudicate whether a cost that is being presented to us is verifiable or not. So we wanted to avoid that sort of misstep on our part where we might incorrectly assume something to cost X dollars, unless it is that very high level public benefit that goes beyond even the menu, in which case we would probably have to get a consultant to verify that cost for us and make sure that that cost is sort of considerable given the amount of density that is being asked for.
Right,
And
so
it-
what would a park, like, how would a park get built in this? Like, if you want, we're just gonna provide housing, or you're just going to provide, you know, extra bike paths? I mean, would
Yeah.
a park ever really get built any more than under the old system?
Yeah, so there's two things. One that, you know, we are also recommending that master plans take a much more direct role in adjusting this menu for the master plans. So I think Bethesda is a good case study in that, even though they have not received the park yet, but some of the other benefits that they have sort of asked for, they adjusted the menu quite a bit. And we think that that's actually a good thing because the infrastructure and these sort of local community needs like parks and streets and all of those things are much better understood at the neighborhood scale than the county-wide scale. So we would actually encourage master plans to add things or take things out of this menu through the master planning process in discussions with the community so that that menu looks a lot in line with what's needed. And case in point, the life science overlay zone that is proposing public benefits for the Great Science Seneca plan area, portion of the plan area, has amended what we gave them as a starting point. And I've really tried to fine tune it so they get the things, and parks are one of the things that they're prioritizing quite a bit.
Okay, and then it just seems like the payment in lieu and the Excel to build provides a lot of extra subjectivity, especially the payment in lieu. I'm wondering how that is going to get governed.
Yeah, so the payment in lieu, the payment in lieu, we will have specific rates for each of the 4 tiers. That's in one of those additional slides that I'll upload tomorrow to the website. And payment in lieu is always going to be sort of a plan B. So we don't want payment in lieu to become kind of the standard operating procedure where you cut a check and you're done. That really should happen in places where it's infeasible to provide the public benefit. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's say there's a property within a block, and of course we don't want them to go ahead and build like, you know, 60 or 70 or 80 feet or 100 feet of a bike lane that starts and ends in the middle of the block and doesn't connect to any other bicycle infrastructure. But if DOT has an ongoing capital improvement project that they're going to build a much larger bike lane, in those cases, it might make sense to accept that payment in lieu and use that payment in lieu to fund those larger projects that extend beyond the capacity of a single application to develop. So that's kind of how we are trying to position payment in lieu kind of as a fallback and also have specific rates that applicants would have to pay for.
Right. And I don't want to take up all the time because other people probably have questions, but what happens as the cost of these things change, like as energy efficiency becomes easier to produce, or you know, inflation affects some areas rather than others?
Yep. Again, a very great point. So there's a couple of things. For the payment in lieu, for example, we are proposing that it be pegged to a regional construction cost index, just like the other payment programs in the county are, like the growth and infrastructure policy or the parks impact payment, so that as inflation goes up and down, those payments sort of adjust to account for that. Excuse me. And I'm sorry, you had another part of it.
tiers, not the payment in lieu, how as energy prices go
Oh, yeah,
down.
yeah, yes. That's
Right.
what I was trying to get to. So the energy one is really important to regularly sort of update, not only because energy might become cheaper, but also because as we are trying to get to a net zero emissions target, we as the county are upgrading our base code requirements.
Mhm.
So the energy related public benefits are going to be in a shifting landscape, both in terms of cost and also in terms of what we require as a base code. So one of our recommendations would be that every 3 years, when the county updates its construction code and green code, that these public benefits are adjusted to reflect that.
That's a good idea. Thanks. Thank you.
Sure. Is Mr. Goldman still here? I know he had a question. If not, I can at least sort of read out his question and answer. He said, has it been considered whether the new system would enable a shorter timeline for development and does save interest and other costs? And I think, yes, that's why we are proposing that, for example, the EUF becomes standard method only, that the LSC is simply done through the overlay zone. So we have tried to make those type of adjustments to the recommendations. And in writing out the compliance procedures for these, we are going to be very mindful to make sure that those compliance procedures are not cumbersome and complicated, because that can add significant time sometimes. And in the end, nobody ends up using those because there's so much time and risk involved with that. I know we are on the hour here. Wanted to see if anybody else had any parting questions or comments before we sign off. I'm not hearing any, so I will end the meeting. Before we do that, maybe Luwei, you can put the project website in the chat, and we will upload all these slides and the recording from today's meeting on our project website tomorrow, and we'll include all the slides, so all the tiers and everything is available for review. But really wanted to take a moment and thank everybody for joining us today. This is your evening. You could be doing anything. You're spending time with us here, so really appreciate it. And if you have any follow-up questions, comments, please feel free to contact me or Grace or Luwei, and we'll be happy to sort of continue the conversation with you. And if you want more of this, or your friends want to know more about this, we have another one next Wednesday at the same time. So with that, I'll end the meeting, and I thank you all for joining us today.